The cold metal chair scraped against the floor as Commander Zixtac settled his massive form across from the human prisoner. The interrogation room was stark white, designed to break the will of captured enemies through sensory deprivation. It had worked on every species the hegemony had encountered in their conquest of 12 star systems. But Captain Jake Martinez sat there like he was waiting for morning coffee, blood still dripping from a cut above his left eye. Zixtac's 4 arms moved with practiced efficiency as he activated the recording device. His insectoid features showed no emotion, but inside he felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful capture. The human colony on Vega Prime had fallen in just 6 hours. Their defenses were primitive, their tactics predictable. Like every other species they had conquered, humans seemed to follow outdated military doctrines that made victory inevitable for the technologically superior hegemony. "State your name and rank for the record," Zixtac commanded in perfect English. The translation implants made communication with primitive species effortless. Martinez looked up with eyes that held no fear. "Captain Jake Martinez, 15th Colonial Defense Regiment. Serial number 7749 Delta Charlie." He paused and tilted his head slightly. "You know, Commander, you speak pretty good English for a bug." The casual insult bounced off Zixtac's armor plating like a pebble. He had heard worse from dying enemies. "Your colony has fallen. Your defense grid is destroyed. Your population centers are under our control. Do you understand the hopelessness of your situation?" Martinez actually smiled at this. It was not the bitter smile of a defeated enemy, or the mad grin of someone who had lost their sanity. It was the patient smile of someone who knew something important that others did not. "Commander, can I ask you a question first?" "You are not in a position to ask questions, human. Humor me. How many hegemony soldiers did you lose taking Vega Prime?" Zixtac's mandibles clicked together in what might have been confusion. "The casualty reports show 17 dead, 43 wounded. A remarkably light cost for conquering an entire world." 17 dead. Martinez repeated the number like he was tasting wine. "And how many human defenders were there?" Intelligence reported approximately 230 military personnel stationed on Vega Prime. Martinez nodded slowly. 230. "And you killed how many of us?" The final count was 196 human combatants. Eliminated. Zixtac felt pride at the efficiency of the operation. "Your species fights bravely, but lacks tactical sophistication." The human captain began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, but grew into full-bodied laughter that echoed off the sterile walls. Zixtac had seen many reactions from prisoners over the years: fear, anger, despair, even madness, but never this kind of genuine amusement. "You think this is funny?" Zixtac's voice carried the dangerous edge that had made lesser species beg for mercy. "Your people are dead. Your world is conquered. You are my prisoner." Martinez wiped tears from his eyes. "I'm sorry, Commander. I don't mean to be rude. It's just that you seem to think you fought humans today." "What are you talking about?" Of course we fought humans. You are human." "Well, yes, I'm human. But what you fought today wasn't humans at war. What you fought today was humans being polite." Zixtac's 4 eyes narrowed to slits. This was clearly some kind of psychological warfare, a desperate attempt to unnerve him with cryptic statements. He had encountered such tactics before. "Explain yourself." Martinez leaned back in his chair despite the restraints. "Tell me something, Commander. In all your conquests, have you ever heard of the Geneva Conventions?" "No." "How about the laws of armed conflict, rules of engagement, the Hague Conventions?" "These mean nothing to me. I figured as much." Martinez looked almost sad now. "See, Commander, humans have this problem. We're really good at killing things. Turns out we're so good at it that we had to make rules to stop ourselves from being too good at it." Zixtac felt a flicker. of something he had not experienced in many years of warfare. It might have been unease. You speak in riddles. No riddles, simple facts. For the last 300 years, human military forces have operated under strict rules of engagement. We have laws about what weapons we can use, what targets we can hit, how we treat prisoners, how we conduct warfare. Every human soldier learns these rules before they ever hold a weapon. Rules that make you weak. Martinez shook his head. Rules that keep us human. See, we learned something a long time ago that your species apparently never figured out. We learned that if we don't limit ourselves, we become something that even we're afraid of. The human captain's voice took on a different tone now. Less casual, more serious. Let me tell you about Lieutenant Amy Foster. She was commanding officer at Kepler Station when your people hit it 3 months ago. Sweet girl from Ohio joined the service to pay for medical school. She wanted to be a pediatric surgeon, help sick kids. Real, gentle soul. Zixthak accessed his memory banks. Kepler Station had been a minor engagement, barely worth recording. A small mining facility with minimal defenses. Kepler Station fell in 4 hours. Minimal casualties on both sides. 4 hours and 17 minutes, actually. But you're wrong about the casualties being minimal. Your people lost over 200 soldiers taking that station. Impossible. The reports clearly state your reports are wrong. Martinez's voice cut through the objection like a blade. Amy Foster had 37 people under her command, 37 humans who were following rules of engagement that your people don't understand and don't follow. Zixthak pulled up. The official records. Kepler Station. Minor mining outpost. Garrison strength estimated at 40 personnel. Resistance collapsed after 4 hours when the commanding officer detonated the facility's power core rather than surrender. Standard. Desperate tactic of inferior forces. Your Lieutenant Foster destroyed the station rather than surrender. Typical of inferior species when facing superior firepower. She destroyed the station, yes, but not because she was inferior. She destroyed it because she ran out of legal ways to kill your soldiers. The words hit Zixthak like physical blows. There was something in Martinez's tone that suggested he was not lying or exaggerating. Something that suggested terrible truth. You want to know what Amy Foster did in those 4 hours and 17 minutes, Commander? You want to know what humans do when they're still following the rules? Despite himself, Zixthak found that he did want to know. The unease was growing stronger now, spreading through his nervous system like poison. Martinez's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She turned your own tactics against you. She used your boarding procedures, your communication protocols, your standard assault patterns. She made your strengths into weaknesses. She made your soldiers afraid to advance, afraid to retreat, afraid to think. Hegemony soldiers do not know fear. They do now. The two words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Zixthak realized that something fundamental had changed in this conversation. He was no longer the interrogator. Somehow, without him noticing, he had become the one being questioned. Martinez leaned forward as much as his restraints would allow. Commander, I need you to understand something very important. What happened at Kepler Station, what happened here at Vega Prime, what's been happening in every engagement between your people and mine, none of that was humans at war. That was humans following rules that we made to protect our enemies from us. You speak nonsense. Do I? Then let me ask you one simple question, Commander, one question that I think you need to consider very carefully. Martinez's eyes locked onto Zixthak's with an intensity that made the alien's exoskeleton prickle. With warning signals, do you know what happens when humans stop following the rules of war? Lieutenant Amy Foster stood in the command center of Kepler Station, watching the hegemony fleet drop out of hyperspace like angry wasps. The mining facility was never meant to be a fortress. It was just a small outpost on the edge of human space. designed to extract rare minerals from the asteroid field that surrounded the system's dead star. But now it was all that stood between the alien invasion force and the civilian transport ships that were still evacuating the inner colonies. "Sergeant Stone, what's our tactical situation?" Foster called out to the grizzled veteran who served as her second-in-command. Rick Stone looked up from his console, his weathered face grim. 37 personnel, including you and me. Most of them are miners who got basic military training last month. We've got standard defensive weapons, nothing fancy. The aliens are bringing 3 heavy cruisers and about 15 smaller ships." Foster nodded. The numbers were terrible, but numbers had never been everything in warfare. "Corporal Webb, are our communications still secure?" Lisa Webb turned from her station. "Yes, ma'am. The aliens haven't found our backup transmitters yet. We can still talk to command." "Good. Send a message to Admiral Watson. Tell him we're going to hold this position as long as possible." Foster paused, considering her next words carefully. "And tell him we're going to follow standard rules of engagement unless he gives us specific authorization to do otherwise." Stone raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, with respect, standard rules of engagement against an enemy that doesn't follow any rules? It all seems like fighting with one hand tied behind our back." "That's exactly what it is, Sergeant, and that's exactly why we do it." Foster turned to face her small command staff. "Listen up, everyone. The aliens are coming, and they're going to hit us hard. They don't follow the Geneva Conventions. They don't have rules about civilian casualties or prisoner treatment. They don't care about proportional response or limiting collateral damage." She walked to the main display, which showed the approaching enemy fleet. "But we do. We follow the rules, because that's what makes us human. We follow the rules because the moment we stop following them, we become something that our own people will be afraid of." The first alien shuttles began their approach an hour later. Foster watched them come in with textbook precision, following standard hegemony assault doctrine that she had studied at the Colonial Defense Academy. The aliens were good soldiers, disciplined and efficient, but they had one critical weakness that they didn't even know about. They had never fought humans, who understood their tactics. "Sergeant Stone, initiate Protocol 7, Foster ordered. Stone's fingers flew over his console. Protocol 7 initiated. All defensive systems are now running on automated responses based on hegemony tactical patterns. The first wave of alien boarding pods hit the station's outer hull with thunderous impacts. Foster had positioned her people carefully, not where human defenders would logically be placed, but where hegemony soldiers would expect to find resistance based on their own military doctrine. When the aliens breached the outer sections, they found exactly what they expected to find: human soldiers in defensive positions, firing standard weapons, following predictable retreat patterns. What they didn't expect was that every single defensive position had been carefully calculated to channel the alien advance into specific corridors and sections of the station. Foster wasn't just defending the station, she was herding the attackers like sheep into a slaughterhouse. "Webb, activate the atmospheric controls," Foster commanded. "Ma'am, that's going to make breathing pretty difficult for our own people in those sections. Our people are wearing sealed suits. The aliens aren't." Foster's voice carried no emotion. "Reduce oxygen to 15% in sections 7 through 12. Increase carbon dioxide to 12%. The effects were immediate. Hegemony soldiers, adapted to a different atmospheric mix, began to slow down and make mistakes. Their advance became sluggish and uncoordinated. Some began to hallucinate from oxygen deprivation. Others simply collapsed. But Foster wasn't done. She had studied the psychological profiles of hegemony forces. They were insectoid creatures who operated in strict hierarchical structures. They communicated through pheromone releases and electromagnetic pulses that their implants translated into speech. And like most insects, they were vulnerable to specific frequencies and chemical agents. "Stone, initiate the mining equipment." "Ma'am, the mining equipment isn't designed for combat use." "No, but it's designed to break down mineral compounds using targeted sonic frequencies. and according to our intelligence reports, hegemony exoskeletons are made of compounds very similar to the crystalline structures we mine here. Stone's eyes widened with understanding. You want to use the sonic miners as weapons. I want to use everything as weapons, Sergeant. That's what humans do. The mining equipment, normally used to shatter asteroids, began broadcasting specific frequencies throughout the station. The effect on the hegemony soldiers was devastating. Their armor began to vibrate and crack. Their communication implants failed. Some of the aliens began to scream as the sonic waves disrupted their natural pheromone production. But the most effective weapon Foster deployed wasn't technological at all. It was psychological. Webb, I need you to hack into their communication network. Ma'am, our equipment isn't compatible with their systems. It doesn't need to be. Remember, their translators work by picking up any form of organized communication and converting it into something they can understand. I want you to broadcast something very specific on all frequencies. What do you want me to broadcast? Foster smiled, and for the first time since the attack began, it was not a pleasant expression. Children's songs, lullabies, nursery rhymes, and I want you to play them at maximum volume on every speaker in the station. The effect was immediate and terrible. Hegemony soldiers, expecting the sounds of battle, instead heard human children singing about wheels on buses and itsy-bitsy spiders. The contrast between the innocent songs and the violence of combat created a psychological disconnect that their minds couldn't process. Trained warriors began to freeze in corridors, unable to advance or retreat, as their brains struggled to understand what they were experiencing. Ma'am, we're getting reports that alien soldiers are starting to break formation, Stone reported. Some of them are just standing in place, not responding to orders. Good. Now let's give them something else to think about. Foster opened a communication channel to the lead hegemony ship. When the alien commander's face appeared on her screen, she could see confusion and growing concern in his compound eyes. This is Lieutenant Amy Foster, commanding officer of Kepler Station. I want to talk. Human, you will surrender immediately or face total destruction. Actually, I have a better idea. I want to make you an offer. You are in no position to make offers. Foster leaned back in her chair, still smiling that cold smile. Commander, in the past 3 hours, your forces have lost 217 soldiers trying to take this station. My people have killed more of your soldiers per minute than any engagement in this war so far. And we've done it all while following the rules of warfare that my species considers binding. You lie. Our casualties are minimal. Check your medical bays, Commander. Check your casualty reports. Your soldiers aren't just dying. They're dying in ways that your species has never encountered before. Ways that are going to give the survivors nightmares for the rest of their lives. There was a long pause as the alien commander consulted his advisors. What do you want? He finally asked. I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that what happened here today was humans fighting with restrictions, humans following rules, humans being civilized. I want you to remember that we did this to your soldiers while we were still trying to be the good guys. Foster stood up and walked closer to the camera. Because, Commander, if you keep pushing us, if you keep attacking our civilians and ignoring the laws of warfare, eventually we're going to stop being the good guys. And when that happens, what you've seen here today is going to look like a friendly conversation. You threaten us with words. No, Commander, I'm warning you with facts. You've been fighting humans who are following rules designed to protect our enemies from us. But rules can be changed. Rules can be suspended. And if that happens, your species is going to learn why we made those rules in the first place. Foster reached for the station's self-destruct controls. This facility is going to be destroyed in 60 seconds. Not because we're desperate, not because we're beaten, but because we're done teaching you this particular lesson. My final advice to you, Commander, is to remember what 37 humans did to over 200 of your best soldiers. Remember it well. The station's power core detonated exactly 60 seconds later, taking with it the remaining hegemony boarding parties and sending a shockwave that damaged two of their smaller ships. But the real damage wasn't physical. The real damage was in the reports that the surviving aliens sent back to their command, reports that described an enemy that didn't fight like any species they had encountered before, an enemy that turned their own strengths against them, that used psychology as effectively as weapons, that seemed to understand hegemony tactics better than the hegemony did themselves. Commander Zixthak stared at Captain Martinez across the interrogation table, his four arms unconsciously tightening around the chair's armrests. The human's account of Kepler Station contradicted everything in the official hegemony reports. 217 casualties from 37 defenders seemed impossible, yet something in Martinez's calm demeanor suggested he was telling the truth. Your story is fascinating fiction, human, but our records clearly show. Your records are wrong, Martinez interrupted without raising his voice. Commander, may I show you something? Before Zixthak could respond, Martinez somehow activated a holographic display that materialized between them. The alien commander's mandibles clicked in surprise. The human was supposed to be completely restrained, his access to technology blocked. How did you— The restraints are real, Commander, but they're designed to hold a human who wants to escape. They're not designed to hold a human who wants to stay exactly where he is. Martinez gestured to the hologram with his chin. This is what I want you to see. The display showed a document written in human script. At the top, in simple block letters, were the words, Geneva Conventions relative to the treatment of prisoners of war. These are the rules I mentioned earlier. Humans have been following variations of these laws for over 300 years. They tell us how to fight wars without becoming monsters. Zixthak studied the document with growing confusion. These restrictions seem designed to weaken your military effectiveness. That's exactly what they're designed to do. The question is, why would a species deliberately weaken its own military? The alien commander had no answer to this. In his experience, species either fought with everything they had, or they were conquered by those who did. The concept of voluntary, military restraint was alien to his understanding. Martinez continued. Let me tell you about Colonel Dan Hughes. He's the human who probably understands these restrictions better than anyone else alive. The holographic display shifted to show a human military installation on Earth. Inside a sterile research facility, Colonel Dan Hughes sat across from Dr. Kate Morgan, a woman in civilian clothes who appeared to be reviewing classified documents. Dan, I've been going through these historical files you sent me, Dr. Morgan said, her voice carrying obvious distress. Some of this material is absolutely horrifying. Colonel Hughes nodded grimly. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen too much of humanity's capacity for violence. Kate, you're looking at human warfare before we developed the Geneva Conventions, before we learned to limit ourselves. This footage from World War II, the psychological profiles from Vietnam, the tactical analyses from the resource wars. Dan, if this is accurate, then humans are capable of things that make other humans afraid to sleep at night. Yes. Dr. Morgan set down the tablet she had been reading, her hands shaking slightly. The casualty ratios, the psychological warfare techniques, the systematic destruction of enemy, infrastructure and morale. According to these files, when humans fight without restrictions, they don't just win battles. They break entire civilizations. That's why we don't fight without restrictions anymore, Kate. That's why every human soldier learns the Geneva Conventions before they learn how to field strip a rifle. We're not trying to protect our enemies from war. We're trying to protect our enemies from us. Hughes walked to a wall display that showed human military doctrine over the centuries. Look at this progression. Every major conflict taught us something new about our own capacity for violence. Every war showed us new ways that humans could destroy not just armies, but entire ways of life. But Dan, if humans are naturally this, Effective at warfare, why limit yourselves? In a galaxy full of hostile species, wouldn't unrestricted warfare be an advantage? The colonel turned to face her with an expression that made Dr. Morgan step back involuntarily. Kate, do you know what the average psychological profile looks like for a human soldier who has fought in unrestricted warfare? No. They become something that other humans are afraid to be in the same room with. They develop thought patterns and behavioral responses that make them effective at total warfare, but completely unable to function in civilized society. They become so good at destroying things that they can't stop destroying things. Hughes activated another display, showing brain scans and psychological evaluations. These are soldiers from the Resource Wars, before the modern Geneva Conventions were fully implemented. Look at their neural activity patterns. Look at their stress responses. They're not human anymore in any meaningful sense. Dr. Morgan studied the data with growing horror. These readings suggest that unrestricted warfare actually changes human brain chemistry permanently. Exactly. We don't follow the Geneva Conventions to be nice to our enemies, Kate. We follow them to stay human ourselves. The scene shifted back to the interrogation room, where Zixathak was processing this information with increasing unease. Martinez watched the alien commander's reaction carefully. Do you understand what Colonel Hughes was explaining, Commander? I understand that humans claim to have developed restrictions on their own military capabilities. Not just restrictions, safeguards, fail-safes, ways to prevent us from becoming something that even we're afraid of. Martinez leaned forward, as much as his restraints would allow. But those safeguards can be removed. What do you mean? I mean that the Geneva Conventions include provisions for their own suspension under specific circumstances. If an enemy consistently violates the laws of warfare, if an enemy targets civilian populations, if an enemy uses prohibited weapons or tactics, then human military command has the legal authority to suspend Geneva Convention protocols. Zixathak felt something cold spreading through his thoracic cavity. And has this ever happened? Not in 300 years. Not since we learned what we become when the restrictions are lifted. Martinez's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But, Commander, your people have been doing exactly the things that would justify suspension of Geneva protocols. We follow standard hegemony military doctrine. You target civilian populations. You use biological weapons. You execute prisoners. You have systematically violated every principle of civilized warfare. Martinez's eyes locked onto Zixathak's compound gaze. And 3 days ago, Human Military Command authorized Protocol Omega. What is Protocol Omega? The formal suspension of all Geneva Convention restrictions for operations against hegemony forces. The words hit Zixathak like a physical blow. Everything he thought he understood about human military capabilities suddenly seemed inadequate. If humans had been fighting while deliberately limiting their own effectiveness and those limits had now been removed, you're lying. This is psychological warfare. Martinez shook his head sadly. Commander, I wish I was lying. But the authorization codes came through yesterday. Every human military unit in this sector has received new rules of engagement. Or rather, they've received authorization to ignore the old rules of engagement. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that what happened at Kepler Station is going to look like a friendly handshake compared to what happens next. Lieutenant Foster and her people killed 200 of your soldiers while following rules designed to protect you from us. Now imagine what humans can do when we stop trying to protect you. Zixathak accessed his tactical databases, trying to understand the implications. If human military forces had been operating under voluntary restrictions, and those restrictions were now removed, then every strategic assessment the hegemony had made about human capabilities was fundamentally flawed. How many human soldiers are there in this sector? About 50,000. And they're all operating under these new protocols? Protocol Omega isn't just about individual soldiers, Commander. It's about total warfare. It's about using every resource, every technology, every psychological and physical advantage that humanity has developed over 3 centuries of interstellar civilization. Martinez gestured again to the holographic display, which now showed technical specifications for weapons and tactics that Zixthak had never encountered. We have weapons that don't just destroy targets, they make the destruction spread to everything. Connected to those targets, we have psychological warfare techniques that can break the will of entire populations. We have strategic doctrines that don't just win wars, they make sure the enemy never wants to fight again. This is impossible. If humans possessed such capabilities, you would have used them already. Would we? Commander, every species the hegemony has conquered before was fighting for their lives from the very beginning. They threw everything they had at you because they had nothing to lose. But humans have been fighting you while following rules that were designed to make war less terrible. Martinez smiled, and this time there was no warmth in the expression at all. But now the rules have changed. Now we're going to show you what Amy Foster meant when she said that what happened at Kepler Station was humans being polite. Zixthak realized that something fundamental had shifted in this conversation. He was no longer interrogating a prisoner. He was receiving a warning from an enemy who no longer had any reason to hold back. What do you want from me? Major Sam Clark stood in the briefing room aboard the human battleship Defiance, staring at orders he had hoped never to see. Around the conference table sat his special operations team, men and women who had served with him through dozens of missions across 3-star systems. They were good soldiers, professional killers, who had always operated within the strict boundaries of human military law. Those boundaries no longer existed. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just received authorization codes that I never wanted to receive, Clark said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. As of 0600 hours this morning, all Geneva Convention protocols have been suspended for operations against hegemony forces. Sergeant Tony Lee, the team's demolitions expert, looked up from the tactical display he had been studying. Sir, what exactly does that mean in practical terms? It means that everything we've been trained not to do, everything we've been taught to avoid, everything that our military doctrine says makes us better than our enemies, all of that is now off the table. Captain Helen Cruz, the team's sniper and reconnaissance specialist, frowned. Major, with respect, we've always been effective within Geneva parameters. Why change now? Clark activated the main display, which showed footage from Colony 7. What they saw made even these hardened soldiers turn away in disgust. Hegemony forces had used biological weapons against civilian populations, including children. The images showed human families dying in agony from engineered plagues that dissolved their nervous systems from the inside out. This is why, Clark said quietly. The hegemony has escalated beyond anything covered in our rules of engagement. They're not just fighting our military forces. They're systematically exterminating human civilian populations using methods that violate every principle of civilized warfare. Tony Lee's hands clenched into fists. So we're going to hit them back the same way? No, Sergeant. We're going to hit them back in ways they never imagined were possible. Clark brought up a new set of tactical displays. Our first target is a hegemony supply depot in the Rigel system. Under Geneva protocols, we would neutralize the military assets and withdraw. Under Protocol Omega, we have different objectives. Helen Cruz studied the new mission parameters with growing unease. Major, these objectives include targeting non-military infrastructure, transportation networks, communication systems, manufacturing facilities. This isn't just about destroying their military capacity. That's correct, Captain. Protocol Omega operates on the principle of total warfare. We're not just trying to win this battle or this campaign. We're trying to ensure that the hegemony never has the capacity to threaten human civilization again. The team spent the next 6 hours reviewing the new tactical doctrines. Everything they had learned about proportional response, minimal necessary force, and protection of non-combatants was replaced with concepts that made them deeply uncomfortable. Cascading infrastructure collapse, psychological dominance operations, systematic civilization disruption. "Sir," Tony Lee said during a break in the briefing, "some of these tactics seem designed to cause suffering that goes way beyond military necessity." Clark nodded grimly. "Sergeant, that's exactly what they're designed to do. The theory behind Protocol Omega is that if we make warfare so terrible for our enemies that they never want to fight us again, we actually reduce the total amount of suffering in the long run. And if we become monsters in the process, then we become monsters who protect innocent people from other monsters." The mission to the Rigel supply depot began 12 hours later. Clark's team approached the target using stealth technology that the hegemony had never encountered. Their ship was virtually invisible to alien sensors, allowing them to observe the target for several hours before beginning their attack. The supply depot was exactly what intelligence had reported: a large facility built into an asteroid with defensive systems, storage areas, and manufacturing capabilities. Under Geneva protocols, they would have destroyed the military storage areas and withdrawn, leaving the manufacturing facilities and defensive positions intact but inoperable. Protocol. Omega had different requirements. "Tony, I want you to analyze the structural composition of this entire asteroid." Lee ran his scans and frowned at the results. "Major, the asteroid is mostly iron and nickel, with some rare earth elements. Standard composition for this type of facility. Can you create a resonance cascade that would destabilize the entire structure?" "Sir, that would destroy not just the military facilities, but everything within a 50-kilometer radius. There are probably civilian workers in those manufacturing plants." Clark felt something die inside his chest. "Sergeant, under protocol. Omega, there are no civilian workers. There are only enemy assets and acceptable casualties." The words tasted like poison in his mouth, but he spoke them anyway. This was what humanity had become when it stopped trying to be better than its enemies. Tony Lee set his charges with the precision of a master craftsman and the reluctance of a man who was betraying everything he had once believed in. The resonance cascade he created didn't just destroy the supply depot, it turned the entire asteroid into a cloud of superheated debris that spread outward for hundreds of kilometers, destroying every hegemony asset in the system. But that was only the beginning. Helen. Cruz's mission was to eliminate key hegemony personnel using methods that would send a message to their command structure. Under Geneva protocols, she would have targeted specific military leaders with clean, quick kills. Under Protocol Omega, her orders were to create fear. She spent 3 days stalking her targets, learning their routines, understanding their psychology. When she finally struck, it wasn't with the merciful precision of a professional soldier. It was with techniques designed to ensure that every surviving hegemony officer would be afraid to sleep at night. Her targets didn't just die. They died in ways that violated every assumption the hegemony had about human warfare. They died slowly, in carefully staged scenarios that demonstrated humanity's understanding of alien psychology and biology. They died in ways that made it clear that humans could kill them anywhere, anytime, regardless of their security measures. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Hegemony officers began requesting transfers away from human-occupied space. Some resigned their commissions entirely. Others required psychiatric treatment for conditions that their species had never experienced before. But the most disturbing change was in Clark's team themselves. After 6 weeks of Protocol Omega operations, they had become something that their former selves wouldn't have recognized. They moved differently, spoke differently, thought differently. The careful restraint that had once defined them as professional soldiers was gone, replaced by an efficiency that was both beautiful and terrible. "Major," Helen Cruz said after their 7th mission under the new protocols, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Go ahead, Captain." "Are we still the good guys?" Clark looked at his sniper, a woman who had once been known for her compassion and careful adherence to rules of engagement. Now she was something that enemy soldiers feared more than death itself. The change in her eyes was subtle, but unmistakable. "I don't know," he said finally. "I know we're protecting human civilians from an enemy that wants to exterminate our entire species. I know we're more effective now than we've ever been. But I also know that we've become something that our own people might be afraid of." Cruz nodded slowly. "The other day, I caught myself planning ways to kill the maintenance crew on our own ship. Not because I wanted to, not because they were threats. Just because my brain now automatically analyzes every person I meet as a potential target. That's what Protocol Omega does to us," Clark said. "It makes us better at warfare by making us worse at everything else." Tony Lee joined the conversation, his voice quiet. "Sir, I've been thinking about after the war. Assuming we win, assuming we go home. What happens to soldiers like us? How do we go back to civilian life when we've spent months learning to think like this?" Clark had been wondering the same thing. The psychological profiles from humanity's pre-Geneva wars suggested that soldiers who fought without restrictions rarely readjusted to peaceful society. They became permanent outsiders, too dangerous for normal human contact, too damaged for normal human relationships. "I think maybe we don't go back," he said finally. "I think maybe this is what we are now. The team's final mission under protocol. Omega took them to a hegemony research facility that was developing new biological weapons. Under Geneva protocols, they would have destroyed the weapons research and captured the scientists for interrogation. Under Protocol Omega, they had different instructions. The facility was heavily defended, but Clark's team had evolved beyond the need for conventional tactics. They didn't assault the facility. They didn't sneak in under cover of darkness. Instead, they spent 2 weeks systematically destroying everything that supported the facility's existence. They poisoned the water supply with compounds that would cause hallucinations in hegemony physiology. They introduced harmonic frequencies into the electrical systems that would cause pain in alien nervous systems. Commander Zixthak sat in stunned silence as Captain Martinez finished his account of Protocol Omega operations. The sterile interrogation room suddenly felt smaller, more oppressive. The alien commander's 4 arms trembled slightly as he processed the implications of what he had heard. "You're telling me that everything we've observed about human military capabilities represents only a fraction of what your species is actually capable of?" Martinez nodded gravely. "Commander, what Major Clark and his team accomplished in the Rigel system wasn't impressive because they were super soldiers or because they had superior technology. It was impressive because they were finally allowed to think like humans instead of thinking like civilized beings trying to be humans. I don't understand the distinction. Let me explain it this way. Every other species in the galaxy fights to win battles. Humans fight to solve problems permanently. When you fought the Altarians, you conquered their worlds and enslaved their populations. When you fought the Centauri Republic, you destroyed their fleet and occupied their territory. But you left the core of what made them threats intact." Martinez shifted in his restraints, leaning forward as much as the bonds would allow. "When humans fight, we don't just defeat our enemies. We eliminate the conditions that made them our enemies in the first place. We don't just win wars. We prevent future wars from being possible." Zixthak's compound eyes narrowed. "You speak in abstractions. Be specific." "Very well. Commander, are you familiar with Project Deep Strike?" "No." The holographic display that Martinez somehow controlled flickered to life again, showing technical specifications that made Zixthak's exoskeleton prickle with instinctive fear. The documents were marked with human military classifications that suggested levels of secrecy beyond anything the hegemony had encountered. Deep Strike is humanity's contingency plan for total warfare against technologically superior enemies. It's based on a simple principle. If we can't match your technology, we'll make your technology irrelevant. The display showed weapon systems that didn't just destroy planets, but could sterilize entire star systems by destabilizing stellar cores. Delivery systems that could cross galactic distances in ways that bypassed conventional space travel, targeting systems that could track enemy assets across multiple dimensions. "This is impossible," Zixthak whispered. "These weapons would require energy outputs greater than most stars." "They do. That's why we built them around stars." Martinez's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Commander, humans have been preparing for interstellar warfare since before we ever left our home system. We assumed that any species we encountered would be more advanced than us, so we developed weapon systems that would work even against enemies with superior technology. But the energy requirements are supplied by the stars themselves. Deep strike weapons don't carry their own power sources. They turn stars into weapons." Zixthak felt something that his species had never experienced in their long history of conquest: existential terror. "How many of these weapons do you have?" "That's classified, but I can tell you that every human colony system has at least 3, and Earth itself has 17. The alien commander accessed his tactical databases, trying to calculate the implications. If humans possessed weapons that could destroy star systems, then every strategic assessment the hegemony had made was not just wrong, but catastrophically inadequate. "Why haven't you used them?" "Because we're civilized. Because we follow rules. Because we believe that there should be limits to warfare even when our enemies don't share that belief." Martinez paused. "But mostly because once we use them, every other species in the galaxy will know that we have them. And then they'll either surrender to us out of fear or ally against us out of desperation. And now? Now the rules have changed. The hegemony's use of biological weapons against civilians has triggered protocols that humanity hoped never to implement." The display shifted to show another classified project. "This is Project Mindbridge. It's based on our discovery that consciousness itself can be weaponized across species barriers." Zixthak stared at brain scan imagery and psychological profiles that seemed to map the fundamental structures of alien thought processes. "What am I looking at?" "The complete psychological profiles of every major species in the galaxy, including yours. We've learned how to induce specific emotional and psychological states in non-human consciousness. Fear, despair, madness, complete psychological breakdown. We can do it remotely, across interstellar distances, to entire populations simultaneously. That's impossible. Different species have completely different neural structures. That's what we thought too, until we discovered that consciousness itself follows certain universal patterns regardless of biology. Commander, human scientists can now induce psychological states in your species that your own psychology has no defense against." The implications hit Zixthak like a physical blow. If humans could attack hegemony psychology directly, then no amount of military technology or tactical superiority would matter. They could simply drive enemy populations insane without ever firing a shot. "But the most comprehensive project is Endgame," Martinez continued. "It's our final solution for species that prove to be existential threats to human civilization." "What is Endgame?" "Complete species termination. Not just destroying your military, not just conquering your worlds, not just enslaving your populations, making your species extinct in ways that ensure it can never threaten anyone again." The display showed biological weapons that targeted specific genetic markers, nanotechnology that could seek out and destroy particular DNA sequences, and ecological warfare techniques that could make entire worlds uninhabitable for specific species while leaving them perfectly suitable for others. "We can kill every member of your species in the galaxy simultaneously while leaving every other form of life completely unharmed," Martinez said quietly. "We can do it in ways that make it look like natural evolutionary pressure rather than warfare. We can make it so that your species simply stops being able to reproduce, and within a generation, you're gone forever." Zixthak realized that his entire worldview had been built on fundamental misconceptions. The hegemony had conquered 12 star systems by being more advanced, more ruthless, and more efficient than their enemies. But they had never encountered a species that had spent centuries preparing for warfare against superior enemies. Why are you telling me this? Because, Commander, none of these projects will be necessary. Martinez smiled, and for the first time since the interrogation began, it was a genuinely warm expression. You see, while you've been interrogating me, thinking that you captured a valuable prisoner, you've actually been providing us with something much more valuable. What? Complete intelligence on hegemony command psychology, tactical doctrine, technological capabilities, and strategic thinking. This entire conversation has been recorded and analyzed by human intelligence specialists. We now know exactly how your species thinks, how it makes decisions, and how it responds to psychological pressure. Zixthak felt his exoskeleton begin to shed stress pheromones as the terrible truth became apparent. This was all planned. My capture, this interrogation, your questions, my answers. All of it was designed to give us the intelligence we need to defeat your species without using any of our more destructive capabilities. The sound of human voices echoed from the corridor outside the interrogation room. Not the voices of guards or other prisoners, but the voices of human soldiers moving with purpose and confidence. Commander, I'm about to be rescued by a human strike team that was never actually trying to rescue me. My capture was always part of the plan. The intelligence I've gathered during our conversation was always the real objective. The door to the interrogation room exploded inward, and human soldiers in advanced combat armor poured through the opening. But they didn't move like desperate rescuers. They moved like professionals completing a routine operation. Captain Martinez, "Sir, are you ready for extraction?" one of the soldiers asked. "Affirmative, Sergeant. The intelligence gathering phase is complete." As the humans released Martinez from his restraints, Zixthak realized that he was no longer the interrogator. He was now the prisoner, and the humans had everything they needed to destroy his species without firing a shot. Martinez stood and stretched, then turned back to Zixthak with an expression that mixed pity and regret. "Commander, I want you to know that what happens next isn't personal. It's just humans being human." "What happens next?" "We're going to demonstrate to your command structure exactly what humans are capable of when we stop being polite. Not because we want to, not because we enjoy it, but because it's the most efficient way to end this war with the minimum loss of life on both sides." As the humans prepared to leave, Martinez paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Commander, you're going to be released in exactly 6 hours. Not because we're being merciful, but because we want you to deliver a message to Hegemony High Command." "What message?" "That they have been fighting humans who were following rules designed to protect the hegemony from us. That those rules have now been suspended, and that what comes next will demonstrate why we created those rules in the first place."